Hey everyone, I'm Nick, and welcome back to the channel. As you know, for the past few weeks, I've been fighting the air suspension on my $2,000 S-Class, so this week I thought I'd take a break from that huge German luxury barge and work on something different. And when I think different and exciting, I think V12. Yeah, that would be fun. So this week, I'm working on this. This is my 1990 BMW 750iL. It's German, it's the size of a small moon, and it's powered by, you guessed it, the V12. So you might be thinking, Nick, you're taking a break from working on a huge European luxury car by working on another huge German luxury car? It's even the same color. Yes, you're right, but there's a huge difference here. This one has a V12. Now, there's a really cool story about how I got this car, and you won't believe the price I paid. But first, let's talk about what's wrong with it, because you know there's something wrong with it. Well, it doesn't drive. It starts and runs just fine, but it won't rev. You put your foot on the gas and it just ignores you. The previous owner tried to figure this out and threw a bunch of parts at the problem, but nothing worked. So after replacing the two throttle bodies, buying a bunch of other parts, and replacing the front suspension in anticipation of being able to drive the car after installing the new throttle bodies, which didn't solve the problem, he sold the car. Now, the throttle bodies on these cars aren't cheap, and it wasn't a terrible guess, but the problem was much more elementary, much better hidden, and a hell of a lot cheaper to fix. So this car is pretty quirky when it comes to the engine. It's actually just two inline sixes jammed together, so it has two throttle bodies, two ECUs, two distributors. I think you get the point. So it's a really good idea to do some research ahead of time before throwing money at these cars. Thankfully, there are a ton of resources out there for these E32 BMWs. There are a couple of weird things that the engineers back in the 80s thought would be a good idea that turned into common problems on these cars. One of them is that the engine management computer is heavily dependent on two lights in the instrument cluster being in working order. It shares a circuit with these lights, so if they burn out, the computer doesn't work properly. This failure usually locks out the throttle response. One way to make sure these lights are working is to look for the EML light to illuminate and then turn off when you start the car. If you don't see the light do this self-test procedure, you have a problem. So when we checked, the light didn't come on, so we took off the steering wheel, pulled the gauge cluster, opened it up, and checked the lights. But the funny thing is, the lights weren't burnt out. So this led us to the second very common problem with these cars, which is that the circuit paths on the cluster's PCB get damaged or degrade, which opens the circuit and causes all the same problems. Unfortunately, we lost all the footage of taking out the cluster and tearing it open, so we're going to pick back up at the point right before I start fixing the problem. This is the inside of the gauge cluster for the E32, and what we're looking at is this area here, because these are the lights that are part of the EML circuit. And as you can see, this has already been repaired. We've got this bridged and this bridged because the trace between these 2 points was bad, and actually I checked on the other side, it was bad between those two contacts. So these lights are wired in parallel, so if one goes out, the system still works. Now this is also a repair on the trace that loops around this bulb from a previous owner. Here you can see where the original trace was damaged. But what we want to check is between this point here and over here on the left, right here between those two pins. This is supposed to be connected here, and so it's in some place in here. The trace is probably bad because this is an open circuit. So what we want to do is we're going to bridge from here to here. So these two right there. Here's another view of where we're going to connect the jumper wire. So to check that, use a multimeter. I did it in continuity mode, but you can also check with resistance. And if you read an open circuit between those two spots, you need the jumper. So let's get one soldered in. Before soldering in my jumper wire, I cut it to a length that would fit between the two pins. Then I soldered the wire to the pin near the EML bulbs, connecting to the previous repair. With that done, I prepped one of the pins we need to connect to on the other end before soldering the wire to it. You can choose either of those two pins since they're connected to each other on the PCB. Then as an extra check, I retested continuity between the two sides, and it's connected. And here's what that looks like. Something important to note here is that if both EML bulbs are burnt out, this repair won't fix the problem, because the bulbs are an integral part of the circuit. You can test that by checking for continuity across the bulb pins. So now that we've done the connections in here, we're going to reinstall it. And you'll notice we removed the steering wheel to get better access. Some people have been able to remove it with the steering wheel in place. It's probably not worth the hassle. So to remove the steering wheel, you'll make sure you remove the bottom cover here. And then when you remove the gauge pod, it's got 4 connections and they're all right here. And we can check on the back here. This also screws in at the top into the top of the dash. So let's get it back in. Undo. And the little levers, we'll latch them in. And when you push it in, it'll actually snap the levers down. So when you remove them, you pull on those, it'll pop it out. Everything we're doing here is the reverse of the removal process for the gauge cluster.
Okay. Back.
That screws in here. Alright, the connector is there. This is the airbag connector, right?
So I'm going to put the wheel back on. See, this is stopping you. Take your key. Put it in. Or to the run position, which pulls that detent in. There we go. That's on. So technically, you're supposed to replace this because it's only meant to be used once, but...
Oh, this is like a lock nut.
Yeah, but it'll be okay. 22 millimeter.
Yep, that looks right, I think, yeah. Should only fit in one direction.
Yep. Okay.
And then put the airbag back in.
Tighten.
We have to tighten that and then put the airbag in.
Yep. Tighten that down, put the airbag back in, and then we have to tighten these screws.
Oh yeah, it's this. They just hold the airbag in place.
Yep.
From the back. The steering wheel nut gets torqued to 59 foot-pounds. These doors sound so good. I'm trying to see.
No, I'm just trying to make sure.
Orientation is right.
Yeah, I don't want to put it in wrong. Okay.
The screws that hold in the airbag are T27s. And with all that reinstalled, let's see if it worked. The EML light is on. Or it turned on.
And on and off. That's perfect.
Okay. Tail light.
Alright, let me try it.
Should I open it? Open.
The battery might not have enough power.
Okay. It's so quiet. It's stumbling a bit, but that sounds good. I feel like it sounds better than the other times.
The only question is,
So does it go past 1500? Well, we might want to wait a little bit.
But it throttles. It didn't before, remember?
Didn't it used to go just a little bit?
It wouldn't throttle at all. Ooh, she's running real rough. Check engine light, yeah.
Well, that's expected. It already was on, I think, before. So. But it used to rev up to like 1,000. I don't know, it's working. It's working!
The check engine light just went off.
I think we did it. I mean, there's more stuff to do, but this is...
Let me just... Oh my goodness. It works.
Yeah, I mean... Something's smoking, yeah. Is it oil or... Oh, is it the oil from the, from this system?
Oh yeah.
So what's going on here is that the leveling suspension fluid is leaking out from near the reservoir onto the exhaust. In the future, we'll either need to overhaul that system or maybe look into an air ride conversion. But now that it revs, it was able to get into the driveway under its own power. So that's how I got my V12 7 Series running and driving for just a few cents. Some research, a wire, and a little bit of solder got this car back on the road again. One thing that was really interesting was that the instrument cluster had stickers that showed that it had been sent off to a repair service at some point in its life. It's really important to not only do your research, but don't assume that just because something's been repaired in the past doesn't mean it can't have broken again or broken in some new way. Always inspect the parts because it could save you a ton of money. In this case, we got really lucky and now we have a running and driving V12 7 Series. And I'm really excited to have a V12 on the channel. If you like this car or if you want to see more of it and hear the story of how I got it, leave a like. If you've ever gotten lucky like this on a simple cheap fix, or you want to give me ideas on what to do next with this car, let me know in the comments. If you want to see what else needs to be fixed and you want to know how much I paid for this thing, subscribe. Next week, I'll be back to our regularly scheduled S-Class content with a video that some of you have been asking for over 2 years. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.